Things are unraveling with the New York Giants just 2 weeks after ESPN's Adam Schefter reported that the team planned to retain head coach Joe Judge. Since then, they've lost in embarrassing fashion to the Philadelphia Eagles, to the Chicago Bears. They had one of the worst passing performances really in recent memory on Sunday, Mike Glennon against the Bears. But then Joe Judge gave an 11-minute impassioned rant, speech, whatever you want to call it, after that loss to the Bears that has really made waves on social media. But essentially, from what I've heard, Joe Judge isn't the biggest problem there with the Giants, and that the front office culture is the biggest issue in New York. Some of that will be fixed because the consensus is that Dave Gettleman will not be back in New York, but they could really just use an entire restart in that front office. Meirov, one of our NFL insiders, what are you hearing about what the Giants plan to do in 2022, and what can they do to fix that?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how this all unfolds over the next week as the season comes to an end because, that report by ESPN mentioned that the Giants are planning to bring back Joe Judge. As we all know, plans in the NFL could change, and this team has really just become unwatchable on Sundays, right? Over the last 7 weeks, they've been held under 13 points in 6 out of those 7 games. It's been a really tough watch, especially this past Sunday against the Bears, where they had negative 10 net passing yards. So it's been a really tough team, and really that Joe Judge press conference that you mentioned, Doug, I mean, it felt like somebody holding on for dear life with all the things that he was trying to say over there. I mean, some of the things that he mentioned, that players who left have been begging that they wish they came back, even though they got more money with this team. I mean, you don't hear coaches saying those type of things, but it was just a complete rant, which really, if Antonio Brown didn't do his whole thing on Sunday, it probably would have gotten more attention. But regardless of that, this team is an interesting situation because most likely Dave Gettleman will be out as general manager. And this dynamic of the team is that they have, family. John Mara, the owner, is actually involved in personnel. They have Chris Mara, who's also involved in personnel. And then if you're going to hire a new GM and the plan is to keep the head coach and keep the quarterback, most GMs who have been working up the ladder really want to walk into a situation where they get to pick the head coach and they get to pick the quarterback. And they would hope that ownership doesn't have that much of an input as to what you end up doing as the personnel guy in the front office. So I think that's one thing to monitor there in the front office. And secondly, and I'm sure Brad could talk about this, they do have 2 first-round picks that will likely be in the top 10, but their cap situation going into next year is in a very tough spot. And, if you're a new GM walking into a situation with that, that's another thing that is also very, very complicated. So the Giants have always been, we've always talked about them as the model organization, a very classy organization. Over these last several years, they've had a rough go at it, hiring several head coaches. They've had Dave Gettleman came in, but didn't really have an interview process. They just hired him because they knew him. So they really have to have a reset over here. It's going to start off the GM position, but what else they end up doing once the season comes to an end will be interesting.
Yeah, Brad Spielberger, our salary cap expert at PFF. Are those 2 first-round picks enough to offset the cap issues that they have there in New York for a prospective GM?
If there were quarterbacks in this class that GMs or prospective GMs were excited about, then maybe the answer is yes. But because the answer to that question is no, it might be no as well. It might not be enough to counterbalance the fact that this team went out last year in free agency, gave Kenny Golladay the biggest contract at wide receiver, retained Leonard Williams on one of the biggest defensive tackle deals in the NFL, even late in the offseason gave Adoree Jackson one of the biggest contracts at cornerback. I mean, they were just spending with reckless abandon, with really no kind of thought of the future or thought of what they were doing, and they are still one of the worst teams in football. And I can say from sources I spoke with during the coaching search that ultimately led to Joe Judge being hired, there were other candidates that were turned off by the infrastructure in place and chose to pursue other opportunities. So as you said, Joe Judge is an issue. I think the reason he points to anything that you cannot measure is because all the things you can measure don't look very good in Joe Judge's favor. But nevertheless, there are a lot of things going on there that I do not think are his fault and need to be corrected if this team is going to get back on track.
I did think it was a little bit surprising that, it was 2 weeks after that report came out that they planned to retain Joe Judge, is that he had that speech that really did seem like he was trying to save his job in New York, and that he was going to put anything out there to kind of curry favor with the fan base, with management. But what he wound up doing was probably just exaggerating too much to say that, guys from other teams are calling him twice a week saying they wish that they were still in New York. That's just, it's not believable. And to say that, guys are coming into his office begging to be re-signed as free agents. And then he said that in 2018, he felt that, the Patriots coaching staff was going to be fired after getting off to such a slow start when, you could just look at what the Patriots did in 2018, and that just simply was not going to happen. And one other thing they said is that when he got hired as the Giants head coach, that the team had given up in the previous season when they had won 2 of their last 3 games. So I think that what Joe Judge wound up doing on Sunday was, he probably hurt himself more than he helped himself by doing that. But we will see what the Giants intend to do in 2022 when they bring on that GM, and we'll see if Joe Judge can actually keep that job as head coach.